up, YouTube? Dan the Fix-It Man. Got another quick video here for you. I'm going to show you how to change your rear brake pads and your rear brake rotors on a 2018 Honda Pilot. Now, this is the all-wheel drive model, but it should be the same for anything that does have the disc drum combo in the back. Now, the first thing that I like to do is push the caliper piston back inside the caliper to make room for the new thicker pad material and, of course, the thicker rotors. Now, what we're doing is essentially pushing the brake fluid backwards up through this line into the master cylinder. So it's important that we pop the hood and take a look at the master cylinder and make sure that it's not too full so that we're not going to overflow that and make a big mess. As an alternative method, you could also take off this rubber cap off of the bleeder screw and crack that open, put a little hose on there, and that will expel the old fluid out the bleeder as you push the caliper piston back in. And that's another way to kind of cycle through your brake fluid. However you'd like to do it is fine, but just a little bit of a warning, if you live in a really rusty area, these are notorious for cracking off or breaking off. Also, with that method, you do risk the possibility of air getting into the system and you will have to bleed your brakes once you're done. The way that we're doing it, we're not going to have to bleed the brakes. So let's go take a look under the hood and see if we've got room in that master cylinder. All right, so here's our master cylinder reservoir right here, and you can see that our fluid level is quite a bit lower than the max line up here. So we should have plenty of room to push that caliper piston back in, and this fluid will just come up to about here, and we should be good. Now, a lot of people ask me, do you need to take the lid off of this reservoir when pushing that back in? And you really don't. I haven't really noticed much difference in the resistance from pushing that back in with or without the cap on there. Now, if you can't see the fluid level, you might have to take the cap off just for that reason. Again, I usually leave it on now because the brake fluid is hygroscopic, meaning that it attracts moisture or water. Even the moisture in the air causes the brake fluid to degrade and go bad. So the less we can expose that to air, the better. I'm going to go ahead and leave the cap on, and this is ready to push the caliper piston back in. Now, you can use a caliper compression tool, but I just like to use a stout little screwdriver or Prybar. This right here is the Mayhew Dominator Demo Driver Screwdriver Prybar Hybrid, so it's really good for this. Just pop it in here, try to catch the edge of the pad, and pull that slowly towards you. Just slow, steady pressure is all it takes. Now I'm going to shift this pry bar in between the inside pad and the rotor. See if we can't push that piston the rest of the way in. Okay, that felt good. Felt like it bottomed out right there. Okay, now we can loosen and remove these two caliper slide pin bolts, and that's a 12mm socket. Just break those loose and take them out. Now we can just take that caliper off, and I'm just going to set it up here, up on the control arm, up out of the way. Now we can pop out the old brake pads. Now the inside pad here had the squealer here at the bottom. Worn down pretty far, not quite to that noisemaker yet, but very close. All right, now we need to loosen and remove these two caliper bracket bolts. That's a 17mm socket to take those off. Now, it's a good idea to have one hand on this bracket so it doesn't fall to the ground as you take these out. There we go. Now, here's where it's very important that you have your parking brake off. You can see that the rotor drum combo here will still move. You have your parking brake inside here, so if that's on, you're never going to get this off. But we also have everybody's favorite Honda Acura rotor screw right here. These are notorious for stripping out, and a lot of people will end up having to drill these out. But if you get yourself something like this, this is an impact screwdriver. It turns counterclockwise every time you strike it. It's kind of like a ratcheting mechanism. So I'm just going to grab a little sledgehammer and hit the back of this while we hold that in there. Hopefully that'll break that loose. That got it. All right, now we might get lucky and the drum might come right off like it feels like it is. Now, if this is stuck, you can give it a whack on either side, you know, a little bit might help break it loose. Sometimes they get seized to the hub here. So hit that with a Tanya Harding or a little Rotor Remover 9000, and that might work. Now, the other thing you could do, there are two threaded holes here in the rotor drum combo. You could get two bolts that are M8 by 1.25 and thread those in, and they'll act like a force screw or a press, and they'll pop this off of the hub, and that will work as well. But in our case, it looks like it's going to come right off. And there's our parking brake shoes. Now, before I put on the new drum, I'm going to do a couple things. I'm going to clean up the brake shoes here. They look like they're still in pretty good shape, but we'll just hit that with some brake cleaner. I'll put some cardboard down here to catch that debris, but I'm also going to clean the surface of the hub right here with a wire wheel on a drill. That just seems to knock off a lot of this corrosion, and then we'll brush that with a little bit of copper anti-seize to prevent that rotor from getting stuck. If you are going to use a drill with a wire wheel, just make sure you wear some eye protection. You don't want to soak the shoes too heavily with brake cleaner because that can break the bond of the glue that holds it to that shoe or that backing plate. So we'll just be kind of mindful of that as you're doing this. Just kind of knocking the dust out of there. All right, now we can brush the hub here with some of this copper anti-seize. Mostly focused around this shoulder right here. That seems to be where they stick the most. But you can brush all of this surface if you'd like. You don't want to get anti-seize on your lug nuts. Just keep that in mind. All right, now you see right here, this little threaded adjuster, that is like a little star wheel. And what you can do is you can push the shoes outward if needed after putting this on. You can actually access that through this hole and through the hole in the drum or rotor combo. Now the rotor drum combo here is packed in some oil from the factory to prevent rusting during shipping or while it sits on the shelf. So let's go ahead and clean that off with some brake cleaner. Just want to wipe the inside and all of these friction surfaces completely clean of that oil so that doesn't foul up our new pads. And you see right here, this little tapered hole, that's the one you want to line up with the threaded hole here. Let's see if this will go on without any adjustment. There we go. Now you notice this little hole right here, that is the hole I'm talking about that you can access and tighten those brake shoes if needed. Now you see this rubber plug in the old rotor. I'm going to pop that out and we're going to put that here once we're done and once we know that that's adjusted. Here it is. I just pushed it out of the old rotor. Now I'm not going to put that in just yet. I'm going to go engage the parking brake and see how well that holds. Before I engage the parking brake, I'm going to put the screw back in because that's going to hold our rotor drum combo up against the hub nice and flush. Don't need to get crazy with torquing that or anything. See, now that's holding our rotor on. Let's check and see how well that holds with the parking brake. And if we need to tighten that, we can. Well, that pedal felt nice and tight. And yeah, there's no moving this. That's not going anywhere. That's nice and snug. Let me go release that. All right, well, our parking brake felt nice and snug. The pedal felt nice and tight too. So I'm happy with that. You know, you really don't have to mess with that a whole lot unless maybe somebody leaves a parking brake on when they drive a lot. But now most modern cars will give you a warning if you're driving around with your parking brake on. Fortunately, this one looks like it was in really good shape, and I kind of anticipated this fitting just fine and not having to adjust it. Now, if you do need to adjust that or tighten that, prybar or screwdriver like this, you can go in there and reach that little star wheel and you can adjust that to push that outward and make this tighter. If you do need to come back and adjust it, you always can. Just pop out this rubber plug. But in our case, it looks like it's exactly where it needs to be. So I'm just going to push this plug in. There we go. All right, now we can clean up that bracket before we put that back on. But this rotor drum combo looks good and the parking brake feels and looks like it's going to work exactly like it should. So let's go ahead and do that next. All right, now we can get this bracket all cleaned up and ready to go back on. And we're also going to pull out and re-grease these slide pins. But the first thing we can do is change out this hardware here. These are the little metal abutment clips that help the pads slide and hold them in place. Now just note though that they are different. See, this one right here has a little tab on it. And the way that this is oriented on the passenger side here, that's at the bottom. So we can pull these out now. And this one here does not have the tab on the top. Now, before I put those new clips on, I'm going to clean this surface really well so that the new clips will sit nice and flush. I'm also going to brush a little bit of caliper grease underneath those clips because you can see we do have a little bit of corrosion happening and we definitely don't want corrosion building up underneath there. The corrosion underneath there can cause those clips to lift up a little bit, and then of course that would cause your brakes to bind. We don't want that. So let's go ahead and clean those up. I'm going to use a wire wheel on a drill. This is a little bit different than the one I used on the hub. Just make sure you wear some eye protection if you're going to use a wire wheel on a drill. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to brush a little bit of this caliper grease underneath there. More of a protectant than a lubricant, but it does really seem to help cut down on some of that corrosion and prevents those clips from lifting. Okay, so these clips just snap right in place. You can see this is the one with the little tab on it. It goes on this side. And this one here. You just want to make sure that those are pressed all the way flush so that the new pads won't bind up. Now, with a little bit of this extra grease, I'm just wiping that here in the channel where the pad will slide. You don't really need much, because if you put a lot of grease in there, it'll just attract dust, but just that little bit will help give this kind of a protective coating and help those pads slide back and forth. Now, the next thing we're going to do is pull out and clean and re-grease these slide pins here. So just kind of grab a hold of that and pull it out as you twist. Now this one's pretty stuck. This probably has the rubber bushing that's swollen a little bit on the end. There we go. There it is. And we just clean this off. Now, you're supposed to replace these rubber bushings here. I know some people just take them off and put them back in without a bushing, and that's fine too, I guess. But what I've done in the past, do you see that little slit there? I'll cut that channel a little bit deeper, because as this swells up, it prevents the air or trapped grease in there from moving past it, and it pushes these slide pins out, and that causes your brakes to bind up. So you might just want to plan ahead and get some replacement little bushings here. Some kits will come with it, or they'll offer it as an option. Now, in our case, this did feel a little stiff, so I'm just going to get the little razor blade, cut that groove a little bit deeper, and I think that will work. Now, do this at your own risk. This is just something I've done because I figured this out when I was in a pinch. But see, I'm just carefully slicing that. I'm not doing this because I'm being cheap, but I mean, I am cheap, but I'm just doing this because I didn't end up getting replacements. The rubber still feels pretty supple. It's just that it's swollen up a little bit, and that's why it was kind of stuck in there. Just that little piece I kind of cut out of there. Here's another groove on the other side. Let's try that one too. Just take a little slice out of that. Just be careful here. Don't cut yourself if you're going to try something like this. I mean, I wouldn't really recommend you do this. This is just what I'm doing because I didn't plan ahead and buy replacements. There we go. Just that little bit of rubber cut out of that groove should now be enough to make that slide in there easier. Okay, so now let's brush this with some nice clean grease here, getting down to the very bottom, but that's all right. All right, let's see how this fits in there now. Oh, that's perfect. That's definitely going to work just fine. I just like to spin that a few times, make sure that that grease is all spread around in there. And you see, it's not pushing out because those little grooves I cut are going to make that bushing work. But you might have to squeeze the boot a little bit to let any of that trapped air pop out of there. It's kind of like you're burping it. But yeah, that's going to work just fine. Now this side will not have the bushing, so we'll just pull that one out, get it cleaned up, and then put it back in. Now I've got some brushes to clean these out with some brake clean and whatnot, but these ones didn't seem like they were bound up, or they're not sticky or anything. The grease wasn't dry, so I'll usually just wipe out the old grease, clean off the slide pin, and put some new grease on and pop them back in. Just like that. And then we'll push it in and squeeze on the boot. You hear that little bit of air kind of snap, crackle, and pop. All right. Nice and smooth. This is now ready to go back on. All right, now before I put the bracket on, I'm just going to grab these caliper bracket bolts, and I'm going to put some thread locker on there. Probably could have cleaned these up a little bit better, but I think that'll work just fine. Just using this medium strength blue from Permatex, kind of spread that around. That looks good right there. Okay, and then we can hold that bracket up and just get these bolts started one at a time. I'm just going to zip these on real quick with the Milwaukee. Now the torque spec on those caliper bracket bolts is 65 foot-pounds. Okay, now we can put our pads on. This is the old one. Remember, our little noisemaker here was on the inside at the bottom. Now we're going to do the same thing with the new pad. We just need to attach the clip. Just snaps onto the pad like that. It's got a little cutout for it. And then that's ready to go in like that. And we'll do the front pad here. That looks good. Now I'm going to brush the backing plate with some of this high temperature silicone ceramic extreme from Permatex. This stuff really seems to help dampen some of the vibrations that can cause noise. Now before I put the caliper on, I'm going to brush this and just try to get rid of some of this gunk that's on there. All right, now I'm going to put the caliper right here, ready to go on, but I'm not going to put it on yet because I am going to use the V-springs that were included with our kit. Now, the old pads did not have the V-springs on them, but they did have the little holes in the end of the pads. So it makes me wonder if maybe from the factory they came with them, maybe they didn't. I guess it might just be an option. I'm going to go ahead and put them on. I like the idea of these V-springs pushing the pads outward and preventing them from dragging on the rotor. So I'm going to go ahead and do it. Sometimes it's a challenge because you do have to use one hand on here to hold them together while you do it. So just going to try to carefully put these in. Yeah, they're pretty strong. You just got to get those started and then squeeze it together tightly while you do this. Now I'm kind of smearing some of that grease around, but that's okay. And then we'll just bring the caliper over it, and there it is. Okay, now we can put in our caliper slide pin bolts. Sometimes you have to spin the slide pin so that the flat spot lines up with the flat spot on the caliper. Just get these started. Yeah, see this one, I'm going to spin that up. Sometimes you just have to spin that to line it up. Okay, the torque spec on these caliper slide pin bolts is 25 foot-pounds. Now, if you get any grease or anything on the surface of the rotor, make sure you wipe that off. But that looks good, and we are done. Now, before you head out, it's very important that you go inside the car and step on the brake pedal several times until it feels firm. Now, when you do this, don't push the pedal all the way to the floor. That can damage the seals in your master cylinder. Just halfway several times until it feels firm. What that does is pushes the caliper back out, pressing those pads up against the rotor where they need to be. And don't forget to double check your master cylinder fluid level. Make sure that that's all topped off where it needs to be as well. I hope you liked the video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you don't mind. That does help me out. I'll get a link in the description where you can pick up some of these parts and tools using the video as well. Thanks so much for watching, and good luck.